Okay, I think people may still be coming in the meeting, but it's 10:02. I think we've slowed down enough where I'll go ahead and start. So, hello, thank you for joining us. This is the May cost growth target tag. My name is Trang Weidermeyer. I'm a policy analyst for Oregon's cost growth target program. And we have a couple new folks joining our monthly technical advisory group meeting. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time explaining what this is. So this technical advisory group is a monthly meeting. There is no definitive roster of members. It's kind of whoever wants to come can come. Our content is basically the majority of our content thus far has been focused on payers and data submission. That's the purpose of this group when it was set up, to work with payers in getting the data submission in, working through some of those kinks in our template and our data submission guidance document, things like that. As we move forward, we're starting to go into the implementation stage of our program, where we're talking about analyzing the data that we collected for the first time last fall. And part of that analysis is reviewing the data with payers and also reviewing the data with provider organizations. So a lot of our new guests are team members from provider organizations. If you looked at the agenda for this month's cost growth target tag meeting, you'll sort of notice there's a new column in the agenda box for partner topic. This is just a quick way for people to gauge, oh, this section of the agenda is relevant to me. I've allotted the green circles for payers, insurers, people from provider organizations are definitely to come to meetings, even if there is no purple circle, but just to let folks know that some of the content will be very technical and getting into the nitty-gritty of how the data is coming in and providing guidance for payer technical staff. And so those are the green circles. And for provider organizations, we'll start to be bringing in more content relevant to you folks. And you can see those sections denoted by the purple circles. And for a lot of content, it'll be relevant to both groups. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Bartleman. I'm the Cost Growth Target Program Manager. And as Trang said, we're happy to see so many provider organizations joining the TAG meetings. We welcome your participation in this. I think we will continue to be primarily focused on data submission and data reporting in this group. I just want to state, in case you're not clear, provider organizations are not data submitters under this program. Provider organizations are not responsible for reporting any data. Only the payers are data submitters. So as we're talking about data submissions, provider folks that are joining us today, please do not think that you suddenly have a big data request coming your way. You do not. But welcome to this meeting. We're happy to have you here. A couple more pieces of context for provider organizations. We had an orientation webinar for provider organizations yesterday. That meeting was recorded. It should be on our website. Hopefully later today, maybe tomorrow. Still working on getting that posted. So if you're wondering what all of this cost growth target program is about and you missed the orientation, I would direct you there. We are not going to spend a lot of time in the TAG meeting today, or just in general, going into some of those big picture overview type questions. But we are holding time today for general Q&A, just because we know this is brand new to some of you and we want to just provide a little extra space for some back and forth. So stick with us today, and if you have other questions just about the cost growth target program or provider organization involvement in general, we'll have time at the end of the meeting today to get into that. But yeah, welcome everybody and happy May.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, thanks. So I missed the last tag monthly meeting, but just to recap what we did, this meeting provided a walkthrough of the draft 2022 template and data submission manual changes. Hopefully none of this is new to folks. These are issues we've sort of batted around in our tag group for the last couple months. All those documents are listed under that tag meeting. Also, the April 27th tag notes are also listed under the contents for this meeting if you wish to look at those. So we did a walkthrough of our template for this year. We did a walkthrough of changes to our manual. We also provided an overview of the performance improvement plan process and template. You could revisit those slides to catch up. I know, Sarah, we're still planning on talking about that whole process throughout this year. And we would definitely encourage any feedback on the proposed timelines outlined. Any technical assistance that you folks might want from OHA in this process. And I don't think we had the template yet, but there is going to be a PIP application template provided to tag folks for review and discussion as well. Also, during the April tag meeting, we shared a list of provider organizations that met the reporting threshold. This is close to the final list, I will say, because we had a couple payer cost growth target files that weren't finalized yet, just a couple, but over the great majority of Oregon resident lives were in our statewide file, and the large provider organizations, it's definitely knowable at that point. So we provided that list for folks at the April tag meeting, but just be aware we will be updating that list now that we are once we finish and analyze the statewide file. Next slide, onto some program updates. So as of May 6th, we are this far from analyzing this far from finalizing the statewide file. We are waiting on just one last submitter to have that stage 3 meeting. But as you can see, we've pretty much got everybody and all the files in the bag. So I know we've said this during our stage 3 meetings with each one of the payers, but thank you so much. And I just want to thank everybody for working so hard in getting this data in for the first year, for the first time in Oregon. And a lot of our payers that haven't submitted this data for other states, we know this was a pretty complicated data submission to compile and submit to us. So just thanks to everybody for working through that. It was a big task. And I hope you're getting some rest, because we're about to do it again September this year. Next slide. All right. Sarah, do you want to take these updates? Okay.
Yeah, so last month we talked a little bit about beginning outreach to provider organizations, and we have done that. So on May 11th, we sent an introduction letter to all of the provider organizations that had been identified out of that initial data submission. So provider organizations on the call today, welcome. We held a provider orientation webinar yesterday. And as I said, that will be posted and the slides will be posted on our website from that. And then we are starting to reach out to each of the provider organizations individually, both to continue to update that contact list and build those connections, and to schedule a meeting to review the initial data, the 2018, 19, and 20 data at the provider level. So for the payers, know that these conversations will look really similar to the validation conversations we had with you all. And we will be sending more information out to the providers shortly, including a proposed agenda. We'll be sharing the data in advance and helping set expectations for those meetings. So that is going to be the bulk of what our team is working on in June and July with the provider organizations.
Oh, is your audio okay?
Sorry, my audio just froze. I think I'm back now. Okay, sorry, committee, also me. So we have the Cost Growth Target Advisory Committee. Finally, the Oregon Health Policy Board appointed members on May 3rd. The roster is available online. And we are working on scheduling committee meetings right now. We're hoping to have those dates finalized and scheduled and announced, hopefully by next week. So upcoming committee meetings, we'll have the first advisory committee meeting in June, and then July, September, and November will be our meeting schedule for the year. So we'll share more information with you all as that continues to develop, but know that we now have a committee and we are relaunching that level of work. The advisory committee is charged with providing guidance to the program. They'll be focusing on some of the bigger picture pieces, whereas the TAG will continue to focus on the technical aspects, including the data submission and reporting. I think there's a question in the chat. I want to make sure we go back to that.
Eric,
Sorry.
Eric Schultz asked, who'll be contacted at the provider organization? We know we're on the list, but haven't gotten a letter.
Ooh, Eric, let me follow up with you offline because we are building that contact list and we might not have all the right people yet for every organization. So let me let you know who we sent it to at your organization.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, I think next slide. Do you want to take this too? It's related to the advisory committee. Yeah, let's keep going. Okay. Here's just a brief overview of upcoming work of the advisory committee. And there'll be more information on our website if you want to dig through a little bit, but let's get to the manual and template final documents. So attached to this meeting invite are the final versions, and I will hand it off to Sam. Oh, whoops. Yes, I'll hand it off to our actuary, Sam, to walk through what those look like.
Thanks, Trang. Let's just go right to the next slide. So this is mostly going to be a review of things we've talked about for the last like 2 or 3 months, maybe some finalizing of things that should be in the template that you will be looking for, and hopefully will help you and will help us in the long term. So the top 2 items here are validation checks. So we got a lot of feedback that we needed more validation. A lot of the validation we were doing behind the scenes could be right up front in the template, and that's what we're trying to do here. So we have some screenshots coming up in the next slide, so we can get into more detail there. But the top one is about the member month threshold for the TME Prove tab. We are implementing a 12 member month threshold. Anything that is 12 member months or less, we'll just go right into unattributed, and we can look at that when we get to it. The provider check is just making sure you actually provided all the provider information that we're asking for, so that we can do our roll up into the provider files, and so we can have those provider meetings. Just makes it easier rather than us having to get in a meeting with you and talk about all the maybe you have a provider in one tab, but we don't have all the information in the other tab. And so this will be a little quick check for you. And then the last one is the demographic adjustment, which we've been talking about for the last few months here. And it's officially in the template now. And everything is going to be demographic adjustment going forward instead of risk adjustment. And we'll get into when we talk about the manual after the template, we can talk a little bit more about details there. So let's go right to the next slide so we can see the very first update. So we've got a member month threshold. So if just to recap real quick, so on the TME Prov tab, The data submitters were submitting anybody that they could attribute to any provider. And to remind you, we wanted providers rolled up at the highest level possible. So if one provider could be rolled up to a larger provider organization system, then that's what we were looking for. But in some cases, that's just not possible, whether because they're not associated with any larger provider systems, or maybe that doesn't work with the payer system, the submitter system, or they just don't know, or for whatever reason, we would have a lot of rows that were just maybe like 5 member months, 10 member months here or there. And those individual providers aren't going to be held accountable in any meaningful way for the cost growth target. So we want those rolled off into the unattributed file rather than clogging up maybe that provider file, which requires maybe a little bit more scrutiny on our part and on your part. So this is just going to make your life a little bit easier, make your check a little bit easier. So if you have, when you go to this tab in the new template, there are member months in the TME Prov tab that are less than 12 or 12 or fewer. So we need more than 12 only. It'll pop up here and you'll get a big, red number on there, and we'll ask you to go ahead and put those member months in the unattributed tab. So it should just shave a little bit of time on the checking that we have to do, on the validating on our end, and maybe make your life a little bit easier because you'll be putting fewer rows into the TME Prov tab, a little bit less for you to check. So hopefully that makes sense, and it'll make everybody's life a little bit easier. Let's go on to the next tab, or the next one there. So Rose, I see your question, TME Prov. That's total medical expenditures broken down into provider, broken down by provider. So we ask TME all, which is total medical expenditures for the entire submitter, broken down by line of business, and the various ways that we ask for it by year and whatnot. TME Prov and TME unattributed are the two tabs that add up to the TME all. So those are total medical expenditures broken down by provider, and those that cannot be attributed to any provider, so that's unattributed. We're just trying to shrink that provider tab a little bit because it was a little cumbersome for everybody to work with, and maybe add those to the unattributed tab. And so those lives and those claims dollars won't be attributed to any provider organization, and so those won't be part of our provider organization meetings that we'll be having. So hopefully that made it a little bit clearer. So the next check is another validation check. Again, this is mostly just making your life a little bit easier so we don't have to have these conversations when we get to the stage 3 meetings. If there are provider, if you supplied a provider in the TME Prov tab and they're not in the Prov ID tab, then there's going to be a big red number here. And if there's a number at all that isn't 0, then we need you to go through and make sure you provided that information in both sections, so that we're able to roll up on our end on the back end work that we have to do. That might be, if you're not used to the data submission, that might seem a little abstract, but those who are very comfortable with the template and went through this last year are probably saying, thank you for doing that. It's doing our work and your work kind of on the same page here. So I think you'll understand when you see it that's going to be much more helpful. I will say that all we have here at the top is just a one line that just says, hey, are there providers missing in the Prov ID tab? It's going to be red, and there's going to be a number. So if there's a 1, then you have one provider that you didn't include in the Prov ID. You're going to have to scroll down in this tab just to find the number, or to find the piece that is not in Prov ID. It again should be bright red, should be easy to find, but you will have to do a little bit of scrolling to make sure you know what you needed to include in Prov ID or what we were expecting for you to include in Prov ID. So a little bit of work there, but I think we can all manage to scroll. Everybody did such a good job with the submission last time. We're confident. Let's go on to the next tab where we're going to talk about the demographic adjustment. So these are the demographic tables. We're moving away from risk adjustment into demographic adjustment. The tables there are only 3. So the far left one is Medicare and dual, so that's line of business 1, 5, and 6. The middle one is Medicaid, and the far right one is commercial, so that's full and partial claims for commercial. We used our all payer, all claim database to come up with what we what we feel are some pretty good demographic factors. The age bands are the same for each line of business. They also coordinate with many of the other states. We did try to overlap with maybe the Connecticut, Rhode Island, some of the national carriers will be very familiar with these age bands. And we also needed to make sure we had enough, so it was statistically relevant. So for each age band, we could feel pretty good about the factors that we're putting together. In some cases, we had to do a little bit of mixing. But if there are any questions about this, we're happy to address them. But this should align with everything we've been saying we were going to do. And for the national carriers, maybe it'll make your life just a little bit easier, but it should make everyone's life easier insofar as we're not asking you to risk adjust, use a risk adjustment tool for every line of business in a unique manner. Instead, we're all just going to use the same demographic adjustments, and then we're able to use demographically adjusted information at the provider level. So we're all going to be on the same page, and we can just talk about everything on a demographic adjusted basis rather than having to kind of code switch there between the provider files and the payer files. So those are the three big changes that are in the template. We also made changes to the manual. I think the next slide is going to get into the data actual spec manual. And we only have one slide on that, so let's go to the next one. Obviously, what I've been saying, everything that was risk adjustment, yes, Deborah, it is their age as of December 31st. So at the end of the year, that's exactly right. And that is in the manual, so those changes should be in there. We also have an FAQ, which we're going to get to here in a second. And any common questions like that, we might just go ahead and throw in the FAQ so you can just look at that and kind of have a quick place to see any common questions. So in the manual, you're going to see anything that was risk adjustment is now demographic adjustment where that is actually applicable. We understand there's probably going to be a little bit of like confusion. People aren't, maybe keeping up with the changes. Not everybody's on the same page at all times. So any place that was risk adjustment is going to be demographic adjustment, and that's going to apply, for pretty much everywhere that there was risk adjustment. That includes the standard deviation. We said there's no change to standard deviation PMPM, and that is true, except for the fact that instead of risk adjusted standard deviation, you're going to be using demographic adjusted standard deviation. So should be a clean change. If there's a place in the manual, or if at any point you're thinking you need to be doing risk adjustment, I need you to stop, don't do risk adjustment, and instead contact us or just switch right over to demographic adjustment as the manual might suggest. So again, if you're thinking you need to do risk adjustment, double check with us. It's probably not right, and we could save you a little bit of time by not doing that. So just if it feels like I'm really beating this, I am. We really want to move away from the risk adjustment. So the last bullet point there is, I kind of already covered it. We've covered it the last few months. We did decide to move to the 12 member month or more than 12 member month threshold. We did some analysis internally. There are just the impacts were very, very minimal. I will say, like, around 1/100th of 1% of member months for the attributable organizations. We're going to be losing like that very tiny sliver of a percent of member months. So if we took away this threshold, or if we added this threshold in, so if we're taking away these very small member months and adding them to unattributed, we're losing such a tiny sliver. We don't think we're losing anything significant. The claims dollars were very tiny as well, like 3/100ths of 1%. So there was some concern at the last tag that we want to make sure that the providers that we can attribute dollars to are getting all the dollars that they that we think they should, and based on our checks, we think we're going to be doing a good enough job here. We're losing like a third of the rows on TME Prove, and we're losing just a very, very tiny sliver of actual attributable lives for the providers' checks. So if anybody has any further concerns about that, I think we have some data to back up our decisions here. And we're really going to reduce some burdens across the board. So if there are any questions about that, we're happy to ask or answer those as well. I think those are the big changes to the template and the manual. I went through them a little fast because we have been talking about them for quite a while, and this was mostly just affirming things that we have done. So I'll pause, and I think I saw some questions, but I saw my team answering the questions as they came through. Trang, if I missed anything, can you let me know? Or if anybody has any questions, I'll pause right here. Let's see. I saw a chat come in, but it's loading very slowly for me. Should we be moving members that have less than 12 member months to unattributed, or just provider rows? So once you roll up once you figure out how many members would be in the provider row, so it could be, 10 members that all have 1 member month. So that's 10 member months. You'll move that entire group into the unattributed tab. So you'll be moving rows and not people. So there's a chance that somebody might have only 1 year in their actually everyone will only have 12 member months in their one row, because it's every row would be 1 month, 1 year. We're not moving every single person in unattributed. It's just if a provider in total, once you put everything together, once you roll everything up, has fewer than 12 member months, 12 member months or fewer, go and throw in unattributed. So it's rows, not people. Did that help? Okay. Will the non-claims be demographically adjusted? No, we're still not demographically adjusting non-claims. We're only adjusting the claims. Okay, so everybody can just go through and look at the manual, the final manual, and the final template, and we're always available. Once you get through there and you have some questions, even if that happens in August when you're putting your files together, reach out to us. We're here. We want to make this as easy as possible for everybody. So hopefully some of these validation checks will help with that. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Trang.
All right, thanks, Sam. And don't be shy about using that email either. Our email inbox. All right, can we go to the next slide, Michelle? Okay, this is just a really brief note. We are going to be publishing a 2022 version of the data submission facts. I think we'll kind of run this kind of like we did last year. So we'll post the facts on the data submission webpage. And as folks come in with questions, we'll collect them. We always have a running tally, kind of like last year. And then we'll be updating the facts periodically through the spring and summer as needed. And every time we update the facts, we will distribute it to the tag and the provider, or sorry, not provider, the payer organization contact sheet we have. Hopefully, if you have an answer, it's in the manual. If it's not in the manual, you'll find it in the facts. And if you can't find it in either, feel free to shoot us an email and we will answer it. All right, next slide. So the final manual, final template, and final facts for this year will be posted on the data submission webpage. On the screen right now, which is kind of blocked by a box on my screen. These are a couple dates for upcoming data reporter events. We have our annual data submission webinar on June 7th. It will be recorded. So if no one on your team can make it, you could always just visit the website, pull up that YouTube link, and watch how we ran through it. The slides and the recording will be posted. If we do have any supplemental documents, we'll post those too. FYI, I don't think we have a date yet, but we are intending to have office hours in July and August, like last year. These are kind of, we don't have an agenda for these office hours. It's basically our team and our validation team, Sam, Yishan, and me, will be online, and folks could call in as they want with any questions. Sometimes we find that even if a payer technical staff don't have any questions, sometimes people like to call in just to hang out and see if there's any helpful tidbits that others bring in. So those will be in July and August. And then a last reminder, September 2nd, the first Friday of September, is when those files are due. These are email submissions to our OHA inbox. And I think that's it for this slide. Do Sam, Yishan, or Sarah have anything else to add? Nope. All right. Let's roll through to the next section, June tag topic planning. So originally, when we sort of mapped out our tag topics early this year, June was going to be on the list of provider organizations, but we were actually able to do that earlier in April. As we mentioned before, we are going to update that list, although the big organizations shouldn't really change. So since that list is out there, we kind of have a free tag meeting in June, and we wanted to solicit your thoughts on what to do with that free time. It's on our calendars. We could use it as a data submission office hours, an extra one. We could do something more focused on the provider organization perspective now that we're starting to reach out and connect with people. And some folks are familiar with the program, some folks are hearing about it for the first time. So we could do something like that. We could also do another data topic, or we could cancel it. So are there any thoughts from folks online right now? Okay, thank you, Eric. A vote for a provider-focused tag topic. Any
Okay.
other? Yes.
Sharing, I think we should keep the June tag meeting as a placeholder for a provider-focused understanding the data conversation. We would certainly want payers to join to help explain that, but I think we'll have just started some initial meetings, and it seems like just having more time for providers to understand the data would be a really good use of that tag meeting. If there are no pressing topics from the payer side, I didn't hear anybody speaking up for another office hours.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea. So we could work on getting material for that, maybe even having a couple scenarios, kind of like what we did with data submissions, so providers can see, oh, I see these patients, here's my experience with them, here's how the payers will be reporting their data to OHA, and then here's how OHA is analyzing them. That would be good. Eric Schultz also asked another question, how to prepare for our individual meeting. Well, I would say, yes, we're making these one-on-one meetings. Everyone's gonna show up with various levels of familiarity with this work. I would say the best thing to do is, if you haven't attended that provider organization orientation, to go, and we'll email out material to the provider contacts we have right now. And as Sarah said, that webpage hopefully will get online today or later this week. Please watch that provider organization orientation. We kind of zoomed out a little bit and talked about cost growth target programs, like the framework in general. There's a national conversation, and we also go into how it's evolved in Oregon to where we are today with this program. That orientation, I think, is a really good place to start. The next thing you could do is when we invite you to those one-on-one meetings, when we settle on a meeting, we are going to share a data summary slide with you. It's gonna look it might look a little confusing at first, but we will walk you through it.
Yeah,
I'm not really sure if
yeah, I think let me stop you there, because I think we don't want people, provider orgs, don't feel like you have to do a lot of prep for that meeting. We will treat that as a continuation of the orientation. We'll send you some data, we'll send some information about what we're looking at, how to look at it, and what we want to cover in that meeting. We are not expecting you to pull a lot of data or do prep before that first conversation. So look for more information coming over email, but don't stress too much about needing to pull anything or prepare. Yeah, great. And if there are things that you're interested in learning more about, let us know, send us an email, and we'll help structure the June tag meeting around that, as well as prepare for your individual meetings. I also want to be sure, the payers are being suspiciously quiet today, and I think that's because we're focusing really heavily on making sure provider organizations have a little bit of grounding in what we're doing, but I want to make sure payers, are you okay with this plan? Are there any needs that you have for June that you want to make sure we're covering? Payers are not expected to attend the initial provider meeting. We do expect that at some point there could be specific questions for payers depending on various attribution or case mix at a given provider. We will then reach out and make those connections, but it won't be for the initial meeting. So maybe, but not a blanket hold on all the payer calendars.
Hi, Sarah. It's Vince Porter at Regents. I think a lot of the pay. I'll speak for myself, but I think on the payer side, you guys, now that we have the final templates and that's all pretty clear and there's no big questions. I'm sure there will be questions as we go back to doing this year's data submittal, and we'll deal with those in, those office hours or whenever. Just because of staff turnover and other things, I'm sure there's likely to be things coming up, but not so far. So thank you.
Thank you for that reassurance, Vince, and absolutely ask us questions anytime, but hopefully everything in the template and manual makes sense, and you've spent the last couple months walking through changes with us, so makes sense. If you're good to go, we just wanted to make a little space for that confirmation. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Anna. Okay. Well, it looks like we have an idea of what the June tag is going to look like. And thanks to all the folks that are contributing to the chat with specific topics they would like to learn more about in that June tag meeting. And if you have other ideas, please feel free to use our inbox. Yes, I see a hand, Vince.
I did have one question, and this is mostly if this is a tag question or the implementation committee question. I'm sure as we're all now kind of moving forward with post-COVID and other things and higher inflation and all these kind of new issues that are creating wrinkles, are those issues going to be discussed in the tag meetings, or are they going to be discussed in, because I think they're really important ones to think about.
Yeah, Vince, thank you for that. I feel like I've gotten this question 3 times today already and at least once yesterday. So the answer is that we're going to be talking about this in all of the venues. So, but the conversation will look different. So in terms of, does this mean, does inflation, does the post-COVID world of the health system mean that we need to revisit the target value, that's a conversation for the new advisory committee. In terms of some of the codifying accountability and that determination of reasonableness step of if an organization or a payer or provider has exceeded the cost growth target and why, is inflation a good reason? I think that will be an ongoing conversation we'll have with the advisory committee as well as with the the rules advisory committee next year. We'll continue to develop out those accountability pieces. I think we will also talk to all of you in one-on-one meetings, both payers and provider orgs, about what the reasons are and how these things are showing up for you. Remember that the data we're looking at right now is lagged. So these initial conversations have been about 18, 19, and 20 data. Some of the inflation is not necessarily going to show up in this period. It'll show up later. Certainly you're seeing it sort of in real time now, but it's not going to be part of the data review for the periods that we're looking at because of that lag. I do think as we go through these one-on-one conversations, we'll have better understanding of what's happening and what you're experiencing, and we'll identify if that means there needs to be policy changes, guidance changes, and do that at the appropriate level of decision making. I think from an analysis perspective, those are the types of conversations we would have with the TAG. So how are you seeing this show up? Are there recommended analyses that we should be doing at the state level? Are there changes to the templates that we should be looking at accommodating to or making to accommodate some of these issues? I think those are the kinds of conversations we'd have at the TAG, but it feels like a very squishy answer, but I think the answer is this is coming up everywhere and we'll be talking about it in many venues, but with different levels of decision making and implications for how the program operates. Great, thanks.
All right, let's go to our last slide. All right, so this, we wanted to hold some space for kind of a general Q&A. I know a couple people have already submitted questions and we have some follow-up we want to connect with folks about after the TAG meeting. But this section is kind of just a free round of general Q&A.
Yeah, I think especially we wanted to hold some more time for provider organizations after yesterday's orientation. So payers, if you don't have questions, you're free to go. We don't have any more content for the meeting today, but if you have questions, now is the time. We have some open floor space.
Do providers get a copy of the attributed and unattributed patients to their clinic? Is there like a roster?
There is not currently a mechanism of which patients, we're not collecting data at the patient level. I think if a clinic is interested in understanding which patients a payer is attributing to them, that might be something we talk about in those individual meetings once payers are involved, and that might be ongoing communication and coordination, but it's not currently built into the data submission. We don't have patient level data.
So then following up to Philip's question, if you don't have patient level data, how would you know that if a clinic's cost or provider's cost growth was because of growth in the population or because of growth in cost and utilization per patient? How do you know that?
So some of that will be, and sorry, team, I'm jumping in, but please back me up. Some of that will be identifiable in the data submission template and in the summary that we'll be able to provide for each provider organization. We can look at where the costs are changing and where the costs are growing across different service categories, whether that's claims-based payments, non-claims-based payments. We'll also be doing some supplemental analysis throughout the program using our all payer, all claims data, and that will help us understand if it's price versus utilization. Also, there will likely be a need to understand what's happening. Is it specifically around high cost outlier patients? Is it one patient who's really sort of swung everything for you? And that will likely require some additional drill down between the payer and the provider organization to understand that data. We do not expect coming into these conversations that the data that we're providing for provider organizations, this aggregate summary of cost growth, will match what you see internally. the denominator is different, the attribution is different, so we'll have to reconcile that a little bit, but we're not trying to get to 100% match of what you see because of how it's structured, but we will want to understand the trends, the directionality, and understand where to go to look for more information. Ooh, okay, we're getting questions in the chat. Let's let's go in order. Okay, Ariel asks, who is gathering this information at other organizations? I'm not sure I understand what you mean by gathering. We are compiling the data and we'll be providing data to each of the provider organizations for that conversation. How you handle reviewing that or looking at data internally is completely up to you. And organization structure varies pretty widely. You might have an IT and analysis shop. That might be your billing team. We're leaving that up to you. And if there are other folks that you want to include in the distribution or in the contact or invite into provider meetings, that's completely at your discretion. I hope that's what you're asking. Deborah and Kristen are asking about attribution methodologies. So one thing we talked about in the orientation yesterday, payers are attributing members to providers using one of 3 different types of attribution. So either member choice, the member has chosen a PCPCH or a primary care provider, and that is somehow the member has picked that organization. Second is some sort of contractual agreement where there's a total cost of care contract or other agreement that for this list of patients, the organization is taking on some responsibility. And then third is a utilization-based attribution. We do have information that's in the data down cost trends based on which type of attribution it is. In terms of attribution methodology for the utilization piece, that would be more of a conversation between individual payers and providers that we can help facilitate to understand more about how that's working, where there are specific questions. One thing that we are also looking at in preparing the data summaries is which payer is or payers are contributing the bulk of the patients to any given provider organization. So we'll have a good sense of who should be in the conversations, and we'll be able to share some of that. The manual is on our website, and we can drop the link in the chat for you, Rose.
Yes.
And to be clear, that's the manual for payers. So providers do not need to report data, but this will help you understand how the payers are preparing and attributing the data. Deborah, Kristen, does that answer your questions about attribution methodologies?
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Deborah, your comment about potential effects of different methods is a great one. This is something that I think some of the other states have looked at a little bit. And I think we are going to have a really good opportunity to explore this and understand the implications. So one key finding, and team, correct me because I'm about to get the numbers wrong, but one thing that we noticed was when we were considering what attribution methodologies to use, and should there just be a standard attribution methodology that all payers implement, or should it be based on this hierarchy? The other states, Massachusetts in particular, were not able to attribute that many lives to providers. I want to say that they were only able to attribute about 30% of patients, or 30% of volume was attributable. In our first look at the 18, 19, 20 data, we are attributing closer to 60%. So we're feeling pretty good about the hierarchy and that we're capturing a lot and that we're able to attribute quite a bit to the providers. But I think there's still a lot to understand, and there'll be a lot more conversations to have about the implications. So Deborah, great flag, more to dig into in the conversations, I think.
And Philip, yeah. And yes, part of the material will give provider organizations in your meeting. You will see a high level breakdown of how much of your member months and total expenses are coming from what payer.
And I also want to say that in this case, we're iterating, and the data summary that we share with you for these individual meetings, you might have way more questions and you might say, can you provide X, Y, and Z? And we might say, yeah, we can do that, no problem, or we can't, we don't have that data, and we might refresh. So I think please enter into these conversations with us with a spirit of iteration and collaboration. We're going to take a first stab at providing a summary. The questions you ask will help us improve those summaries and figure out the right path. It's a little different on the payer side because the payers have submitted the data to us. So when we iterate with them, it's a different conversation than when we'll iterate with the providers, but we do want to do that. And just recognize that we might not get that summary perfect on the first pass, and you might have questions, and we might be able to improve that quite a bit. So we are open to trying to do that. Other questions? This is great. Curtis asking, we are not risk adjusting the non-claims expenses. Will there be an opportunity to continue a discussion around that? Can you say more about continuing the discussion about that those non-claims should have some additional adjustment applied to them?
Yeah, so from our perspective at Providence, so when we're right now, those non-claims expense are not included in a risk adjustment. And there are some arrangements we have that have a very significant dollar amount that gets in there. So we do have concerns when you only apply risk adjustment or the demo graph, the demo risk score going forward, only to the claims expense and you don't do that to the non-claims expense.
Yeah, Sam, help me. I want to say we can continue to talk about that. I don't want to rule it out. I think we've locked in 2022. The template is final now. Let's go for that. But in terms of an ongoing conversation, I think, yeah, let's understand more about the percent of expenses that we're talking about, how much of an impact that would have, and what it would mean to do a demographic adjustment of non-claims expenses, because that seems kind of wild to me conceptually. But Sam.
Yeah, I think it's both wild and maybe something we need to consider down the road, because the question asker, I think, is right that there are more and more of the non-claims are going to be attached to sort of a non-traditional claim is more what it is. But based on the information that we're actually asking for and the information that we feel that it should be possible to get, we'd be demo adjusting or risk adjusting with a much broader brush than we are capable of, or than we're comfortable with right now. So maybe in the future we can talk with the submitters and we can get more categories, get more specific with the non-claims we're asking for. But right now, with the categories we're asking for, we feel that we would be adjusting too many non-claims dollars that are not attached in any way, in any meaningful way, to an actual risk of the members' health status or their age and sex status. So this is an ongoing conversation. So Sarah, yes, and question asker, yes. You're both right. I think with the way we're approaching it right now is the way we're most comfortable with, not painting with too broad of a brush, which also does align with what the other states are doing. But this can be an ongoing conversation.
So I would say a couple things. Hang on, Greg, I saw your hand, but a couple of things. We just published the new template. Let's start the running list of changes and questions for next year. So Sam, let's make sure this is on the list. Check. Two, I think, Curtis, Providence, right? So I think when you're thinking about your data and reviewing internally, I would say this might be worth some analysis. I know you have a team that can look at this. Like, how much of a difference would it make for you? How many people, what percent of lives and dollars are we talking about? That might be helpful data to have to come into a future conversation. So to the extent that that's something you want to keep an eye on internally, that seems like it would be helpful. I'd flag that for you now, and we can continue the conversation.
And I just point out that we did have those we have looked at that. We did have those conversations. We were meeting with, Sam and Tram and team. So that is, we just want to make sure that's still up front. That's still, we have concerns about that. Make sure it's not getting lost there.
It's not lost.
One other thing I would say is, if it turned out, and I think this is probably unlikely, but maybe in the future state when we've moved even more and more to VBP, like if it turns out that the reason a payer did not meet the cost growth target in a given year was somehow mitigated by adjusting their non-claims expenses, and that was sort of the breaking factor, I think we'd want to take that into consideration. Like, if that is the primary reason you did not meet the cost growth target in a given year, that seems like we would take a closer look. I think that's unlikely given where the dollars flow and what we know about cost drivers, but I wouldn't rule it out entirely. Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
Greg, sorry, I keep cutting you off.
Yeah, you actually are going the directions that I was actually going to suggest, because I agree with Sam. The way this is written right now, And we have at Kaiser looked at exactly those same kind of issues in terms of the data we have. Given the template as it exists, I agree with OHA that this is the best way to handle it. And then, as you said, I think that in the future, certainly Kaiser would be more than happy to participate in discussions on any refinements to the template that could address some of these situations where you have a non-claims item that is connected to your risk level of the population, because there are items that could be out there. So we would do that. And then, like you just said, I would sit there and say the way we would be approaching it is that if we sat there, and you should be able to pull that stuff aside, those specific contracts that would be non-claims, and then you should be able to sit there and say, well, if as part of your explanation that all of us are given the opportunity to say that that was a driver that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, great. And I would also add, and this is me being a little bit snarky, so I apologize for that, but remember the last couple of rounds of tag conversations, Massachusetts is not adjusting anything. And so when we're talking about other states, we're moving towards a more alignment with other states, but taking adjustment off the table full stop was also something that was on the table. And so I think we're still trying to navigate that space of what is the right amount of adjustment to make this data meaningful, but also an appropriate reflection of what's going on. Eric, you asked for a mock data set. Trang, yes, we will share, but I want to clarify, what we're going to share is the template and the mock data set that the payers are submitting, so you can see what the data looks like when it comes to us. I don't want to commit to putting together mock data for the providers because I think we're ready to give you the real data. So let's just jump right to that stage in the next couple of weeks. So take a look at the payer template, but bear with us and we're going to get you that provider data as soon as we can. Other questions, comments? Okay, Trang, you want to wrap us up?
All right. Thank you. I've been taking so many notes from our discussion today. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. So our June meeting, it's Wednesday, always a Wednesday, June 22nd. We have these in 2-hour blocks, 10 to 12 Pacific Standard Time. The content is TBD, but we are, as of today, going to change it to something more provider focused. And that is the last of our slides. If you're looking at the slide deck, you'll see a little calendar where we keep track of what we've done and where we're going. And with that, we've reached the end of our meeting. Thanks everybody for, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry, Trang, one more housekeeping thing. We have historically not been sending out the calendar invites for tag meetings. That gets really clunky. Distribution lists change constantly. However, with the inclusion of all of the provider orgs, there's been a lot of questions and confusion, and people have been requesting the appointments more. So I think we wanted to ask the Teams link and conference line for all of the meetings for the rest of the year. The tag meetings for the rest of the year are on our tag website. You can pull that information. We'll always send it out with the agenda to the tag distribution list. But should we send the invites? Should we just send the calendar invites to you all? Does that make life easier?
Yes, please.
I agree.
Yes, me too. Because if it's not on my calendar,
Yes,
I'm not
yes,
attending.
yes.
Okay, I'm hearing a resounding yes. Okay, so the June meeting, all of the meetings for the year, always the fourth Wednesday of the month at 10. But we will plan on sending out calendar invites for tag meetings to the rest of the year to the distribution list. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Great. Well, we all have an hour left to the Wednesday. Thanks for joining. Thanks for coming with questions. And yeah, looking forward to the rest of 2022 with everybody. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thanks.